Welcome to the special series of READ program webinars for parents of Delhi Public School at Patna, Pune, Ludhiana, and Coimbatore on inculcating reading cultures in home. The webinars are an initiative of Takshala Education Society to dwell into the relevance of reading as a life skill. READ program, as you are aware, is a core scholastic plugin that has been implemented across our 4 schools since session 2013-14, wherein class-specific supplementary books are prescribed for students to foster the love of reading without any pressure of assignment or assessment. And one period weekly is allotted to pleasure reading by all members, including students, teachers, management, and support staff, and visitors of the school. As we enter into the 9th year of the READ program, we have engaged Bookworm, a Goa-based charitable trust working for library engagement and education to enhance, refresh, and revitalize it. Today's session is a part of this endeavor. In this session titled Reading the Big Picture, our speaker, Ms. Sujata Noronha, introduces the READ program for session 2021-22 to parents of the students in class levels nursery to 5. She elucidates the focus and approach of the program and exposes 2 dimensions around reading based on research and practice. Ms. Sujata Noronha is dedicated to the acts of reading, teaching, and learning. She is the founder director of Bookworm, a library-based organization in Goa. She holds master's degree in management and education and an MPhil in education. Ms. Noronha conceptualized the Library Educator's course, a first of its kind professional development course, and executes it in collaboration with the Tata Trust initiative Parag for educators, teachers, and librarians of school-age children. She's a consultant to numerous NGOs and schools in India, as well to the Government of Tibet. She co-teaches a First Language Pedagogy Course at TISS Mumbai and merges children's books into every aspect of her work. Ms. Noronha believes that books are enablers of positive change and is committed towards promoting and supporting good books for all. The speaker would converse for about 60 minutes on the topic of her expertise. You may submit questions through the chat box of our YouTube channel. All questions from the viewers would be answered collectively by the speaker in the last 30 minutes of the session. We begin now. Over to Ms. Sujata Noronha.
Thank you, Simrat. Thank you, Takshala Education Society, for this vision. In all my years of working with books and reading, I cannot remember a school system that's as disciplined and dedicated about reading for pleasure as I've come to understand the Takshala Education Society's READ program with these 4 schools. Thank you very much for this honor and this project of being able to inform and revitalize this program for the school, particularly for the children, particularly for me in this time, which I think is one of the most uncertain times any of us are living through. And for me, the children, are a community we must really be wary and worried about, because we don't know how they're going to come through this really difficult time. And reading has always been the act that has saved people in crisis. Historically, that's been the one thing that has kept people in prisons alive, that has kept people in concentration camps hopeful, that has kept people in war-torn countries always filled with promise. So I cannot think of a better time than now to enhance the READ program, because the world around us is changing. And so thank you for this honor. Good evening to everybody. Warmest good evening to parents who've signed in to this webinar. Without you, I think any initiative that a school or an organization like us wants to do with children becomes impossible. So for me, this hour that's going to unfold is really an invitation to a partnership, an invitation from me and my organization, from everyone at Takshila Education Society, to partner with us in refreshing and revitalizing how our children approach reading in this academic year. I've imagined this program in a particular way, but for this year, I've also informed the collection of books that will come to each child. And that perhaps has been an absolute joy and a privilege. And I hope to hear back from you all in the course of the year as your children open their bags and begin to read. But I thought before we get there to what we could do when the read bags come home, I wanted to locate why reading. And I wanted to locate for you, together with me, what I'm calling the big picture. And so for the next 40 minutes, I urge you to stay with my trend of thought in the hope that towards the end of this hour, you see what argument I'm making about reading. And you can raise questions during or after based on these ideas that I'm positing. I'm going to see you 4 times more, I think, in this year. And so today is just an introduction, really a big invitation to be a partner with us on this program. Thank you for being here. And I'd really ask all of you to put your arms out and then wrap them around yourselves. This has become my new Zoom hug, and give yourself the warmest, tightest hug you can, because you're here and because you've perhaps had a very hard year, and none of us know what the year ahead holds for us, but we have to be hopeful and continue to practice being safe. So thank you again for being here. I'd like to start with a presentation that has 4 comic strips that I'm treating as a warm-up. Just like we do physical warm-ups before you begin to get onto the treadmill and exercise, our mental processes also need warm-ups so that I can bring you, invite you into what I'm going to talk about. So I'm using 4 cartoon strips. So the first one is really an invitation for you to just look at this and tell me, if you can, through the chat, what you think about it. Even a word in comment would be lovely, so I know you're reading with me. Is this familiar for anyone in your homes? Does it make sense? Are you either the child or the parent? Do you get the argument the child is making and the argument the parent is making? Both with very different worldviews. In many homes, I can imagine something like this happening, where we imagine our children could be doing something and our children's worlds are beckoning that they should be doing something else. We look at the next cartoon, which is really what many of us who have used all our time in life to read understand. Tavleen, are you now Tigger or are you Calvin? I wonder. Because in this cartoon, uh, Tigger is really the reader in all of us who finds fun and joy in books. And Calvin is typical of hundreds and thousands of children and adults who wonder what is it about books that excites some of us. But when we are excited about books, and this is something parents I want us to think a little bit about, when we are excited about books, it is proven and it is demonstrated and it is natural that people around us automatically begin to get excited about what we are excited about. Oh, thank you. Some of you I can see in the chat are still responding to the earlier cartoon. Sorry, I'm not keeping good pace with everything. But this one, for me, where Calvin also wants to know what's in the book, is really a wake-up call for those of us who love reading, who also bear a social responsibility to invite more people into this world of ours. And so I'm hoping today is the start of that kind of a invitation. Yes, someone says they miss their friends in the lockdown. I can completely understand that. Someone misses their teachers, someone's missing school. I know. It is a very hard time, isn't it? If we look at the next cartoon, it's a political cartoon. It's interesting. Parents who are watching, I'd urge you to read it. So this one's really in a strange way a complicated cartoon, because many of us find ourselves in these thought loops that if reading, and this has been said to me on many occasions, if reading is such a wonderful thing and so great, then why are we not seeing more people reading? Yeah, thank you, Sanjay. I'm completely with you on this. But there is again a truth in the fact that those of us who love to read, we're also rather private readers. We don't run around evangelizing the act of reading. We don't promote it enough because perhaps half the time we're just so busy reading. And what I think is absolutely marvelous is you belong to a school system that is not just encouraging you to read, it's promoting reading, it is ensuring the children have books, and then it's inviting crazy, ardent, passionate readers like me to come and talk to you. And so I feel this idea that the librarians put out this idea that reading is good but don't perhaps talk enough about it could also be one of the problems of why, as a culture of parents, many of us are not completely sold on the idea that our children must read. Ayan, I'm sorry you're missing everything that you do in school. I'm going to use some magic powers and hope that soon everything comes back to some kind of normal for us. But I think we'll have to wait, Ayan, a little bit. Yeah, reading does need focus, Garima, and reading needs discipline. Two words I think that I'm going out of fashion a lot. This idea that I have to attend, I have to be focused, and that I have to be disciplined. And so the last cartoon I want to share is really one of my favorites. It's very old. It's from a series called Peanuts. For me, this cartoon again brings into point this question that really what's so great about reading, and that you'll just encourage it and you share books and you give out books, because we have become a culture that actually puts a heavy price on anything that is good, right? The more expensive the restaurant, the better it is. The more it costs for us to fly on a holiday, the better it is. The more the designer clothing costs, the better it is. And we are right now in a consumerist society that is judging value by price. And then you have this act of reading, which is almost free. And you tend to think, really, like if it's so there, it's easy, the school sends us a bag, there are, my brain is able to decode and understand, what's the big deal? And I wonder at a deeply subconscious level if these are some of the reasons that are putting us off this completely powerful act of reading. And so I'm hoping for the next half hour to actually show you how deep reading is an immensely powerful movement in our brain, which actually affects us. So we all read differently. Some of us read on the surface. You may be reading multiple text messages a day. You may be sending and writing multiple messages. You may be reading short, the ticker on your news feeds. You may be reading copious emails and documents. You will be doing different kinds of reading. But I don't know how many of us will be just reading for pleasure, what we call reading for joy. How many of us will be just reading because I want to read? As these numbers come down, the state of our humanity is also going to decrease. And this is troubling for all of us who believe in the act of reading. So I want you to spend 30 seconds thinking, if you are a reader or if you're not a reader, somewhere in your mind you will have a sense about reading having some benefits. And I'd like you to just put down in the chat in one word, what are these benefits about reading? What do you think are the benefits of reading? Just put them down in the chat. Thank you, Deepak, about reading and cost. Yeah. All the best to the parents who are raising twins. Your Shreya's thinking of this lovely book, Book Uncle and Me. Yeah. Can we put down words about what we think reading does for us as a humanity? What does reading give us? What are the benefits of reading? Patience, how lovely. I'm going to wait for at least 5. Knowledge into many times. Okay. That's a very, very often repeated benefit. Excellent. I'm going to wait for 3 more. Grammar, so my language will improve if I read. That's a really practical thing. Yeah, vocabulary and grammar. Wonderful. Anything else? One more idea. Fun. Thank you. Focus. Lovely. Your skill of reading will become better. Yes. Nice. Okay. A powerful cognitive function of concentration. Thank you. So you can see, and your imagination. Now you're warming up. Thank you, audience. I can see that we now have quite a number of benefits of reading. So typically, when I ask this question, yes, you'll get information. If we can move to the next slide, typically, especially with teachers, when I ask this question, I get typically circling the same words, which over the years I have formed into a word cloud that always holds me in good stead. And these are some of the words that people think say that reading gives them over time. As you can see, knowledge is a big one. Language, yes, is also big. Creativity, I perhaps it includes imagination, positive association, perspective. Thank you. You are giving me even more words that are not in this cloud. So good to have. So reading really, we know, no, at a deeply, perhaps conscious level, we know that it has benefits. But somehow this consciousness doesn't flow up into our proactive action. And I'm not saying this because I have any evidence, but just when you look around in society, we're not seeing enough of acts of reading, and we're definitely not seeing enough of the benefits of reading. Because if we were, I think we would be a very different community, a different nation, a different group of people. So, one really powerful thing that somebody wrote, it teaches a lesson, which is close. One very important thing that reading does, and somebody wrote perspective, is that it allows us to enter worlds that you and I may never live in. But because I read, I suddenly am able to get a perspective into another world. And this act of reading other worlds is unparalleled. There's nothing else that can give it to you. Yes, you come to know about other cultures. And the wonderful thing is, we don't only need to read books to enter other worlds, especially in this digital age with this huge technological revolution. We are reading mediums, right? We are reading different texts in different mediums. And today, because you are a large number and I can't read a printed text with you, I've chosen a really short film that I want to watch with you. We're going to use this film as a text from which I'm going to springboard the big picture ideas. And I'll invite you, the film is just 15 minutes, it's beautifully produced, to just sit back, watch it, allow this story to flow over you, and then we're going to talk again briefly for the time that remains. So I invite you now to watch a film called The Paper Boy.
काली माई बाड़ी हमारे गाँव ओ एगो काली माई बाड़ी हमारे गाँव आता हो हमरा के रहिया बता।
ये मौसम नदी का किनारा ये चंचल हवा
संकट हरना मंगल मूरत रूप राम लखन सीता सहित सदा बसहु सियावर रामचंद्र।
We'll continue with where I was on this journey, imagining that we saw the end of Paperboy. It was important for us actually to see the end of that text, because the way that text ends is you have a child who cannot read, yet who is actually delivering newspapers to literate homes in apartment buildings, where people can read. And he is out of this circle of literacy. He is out of this opportunity of literacy. And he has his own dreams and aspirations. He has no material to read and write, and so he uses a wall. He finds bits of chalk or cement dust, and he uses those as markings. And he covets this beautifully designed pair of shoes as an object of absolute visual joy in his otherwise very, very stripped down life. And the film will evoke, in any of us who watch it entirely, it will evoke feelings, it will evoke thoughts, it will evoke some ideas about the state of our world, what we should do, what we cannot do. But what I was hoping and desiring deeply that it evokes in us is this opportunity that all of us have to be readers, because of our privilege, because of our social class, because of the opportunities afforded to us. And yet, quite systematically, we don't appear to be harnessing that privilege enough in being joyous about the act of reading. So my initial idea was, when we watched this, I would have wanted you to share what you felt on watching a film like this. What kind of a reading did this film evoke in you? Did it evoke in you what we call in the science of reading a deep reading emotion, or a shallow reading emotion? Because what MRI MRI processes show us is that when we are watching certain media, just like when we are reading, depending on what we are watching and how engaged we are with what we are watching, our brain gets fired up in different ways. And the longer we watch something that is powerful and that has deep triggers and cognitive strengths in it, forcing us to think, process, sequence, remember, make sense, decode, the much more of our brain is being lit up than when we are just watching what I'm going to call shallow content. And we have to get into this examination process as human beings, particularly as parents and for our children, is what is the kind of reading I do in the day and how much of reading I do. So typical responses to a film like this from previous use of this would be that it allows us to see reality. It allows us to recognize these divides that exist. It brings awareness, just like any reading does, right? It tells us, gives us knowledge, it gives us information, it helps us understand. It shows us opportunities to be kind, to get into somebody else's shoes, to think of what actions of goodness could pervade in the world. Because this is a beautifully made film, it has a sharp aesthetic to it, and it may also actually remind us about how beautiful certain shots are and scenes are, and how wonderful it is to live in the world with this kind of beauty. It might compel in us this relationship between what I need and what I want, and how do I harness this for myself. Critical, a powerful film or a text will ask of me to reflect. If you have read something and you have no thought after you finish reading that, no thought for longer than the attention span of a goldfish, which is 8 seconds, if you don't think longer than that, then you are not entering this phase of reflection. And then you are actually standing in the shallow end of the reading pool, which is not a bad end. We can't always be in the deep end, but how much are you in the shallow? That's the question for you. That's the question that will determine the reading culture of your home and the kind of reader your child will become. And I feel very strongly that if you put yourself through that really small analysis of the kinds of reading you do, how well you read, and how deeply you read, you will act differently. This is my biggest faith in humanity, that when we know better, we do better. And so for the next 20 minutes or 15 minutes, I just want to leave you with 5 important brain science facts that I hope help you to know better what is the power of deep reading. So if we move to the next slide, please. As I've mentioned, there are, and this is, theoretically posited, it's not just an idea, that there are benefits that come from reading deeply, and there are limitations that come from reading shallowly. We need both, particularly in this day and age with the way information comes at you. You can't read everything deeply. But how much of deep reading and how much of shallow reading actually affects how your brain functions. This is critical for our young children who have developing brains. So yes, so let's move to the next slide. And thank you, Nidhi. I do agree that reading refreshes the mind. It's a beautiful statement at this time where I'm bringing in actually the organ of the mind, the brain, for us to think about. So this is an image just for us to refresh our 8th standard biology, that our brain is divided into different parts, and each of our parts of the brain we now know perform certain functions. And as you'll see, your frontal lobe does important things of thinking, memory, behavior, and movement. Your temporal lobe is where it monitors your hearing, how much you learn, that is the cognitive benefits, and how you feel. Your parietal lobe is really how you process language. What do you understand from words, vocabulary, grammar, syntax, comprehension? Even the aesthetic of language, the beauty of language will all come from that parietal lobe. And touch, things that you touch and feel. Your occipital lobe, which is right now, all of us, particularly all of us in this lockdown period, are using our occipital lobes the highest, because that's the channel of sight. So it's not just about looking at the world. Now we are looking at our lessons, we're looking at teachers, we're looking at colleagues, we're looking at everything visually through a tunnel, through a screen, and we're trying to make sense of it. It's the sight center, it's our visual center. It's very, very active. And we have at the cerebellum, which actually does coordination, which is not just bodily coordination, but also tying up so many mental things together. And then our brain stem that puts life into our brain. So I want you to remember your brain, and we're going to look at just one hemisphere in the next slide, which is what reading does to our brain. Now you will see there are dots, colored dots, and the red dot is your visual center, where all information enters. So when your child is looking at a picture book or any book, or even looking at the screen and watching something, that red button, that entry point is bright. Now, if I was only doing shallow reading, if I was only looking at something that lasted 6 seconds to 7 seconds, and then I'm swiping or moving to the right or moving to the left, I'm unlikely, completely unlikely, to be lighting up all the centers of my brain that would otherwise typically be lit up if I was reading a text. And the orange dots are actually your language centers that get highlighted when you are decoding, when you're recalling words, when you're bringing meaning to those words, when you're sequencing this word memory in a sentence for your brain to make sense of, and then you're reading the next sentence and you're joining that up. All of that gets left out when I am not actually processing text. So for all of us, and there is a huge army of people who actually argue that why do we need to read? Because I can listen to only audiobooks, I can watch only film. At no point I'm saying you're wrong. But I'm also reminding us that when we don't read, we are not activating a very, very powerful center of our brain that is actually needed for our entire mind to come alive. And that's your language and word processing area. It doesn't trigger and fire up in the same way when you're only listening to words and watching words. Because reading is an artificial activity. Reading is not something we're born to do. Reading is something we teach ourselves to do, but our brains are wired with all the correct things to become readers. So it's like saying you have this amazing high powered car that can do so many things, but you're only driving to the city in second gear and you're not using any other high functioning parts of this beautiful, expensive machine you bought. When you choose to not read, you are underutilizing your brain. So that's one big thing I really want you parents to think about today. If we go to the next slide, I wanted to show you, this is one of my favorite scans, and it's work done by this amazing neuroscientist, which showed us some years back how the brain looks when you read and when you don't read. And I ask you to focus on the image to the left, which is the image of the literate brain. That is a brain that decodes words and sentences and paragraphs, reads and writes. And on the complete right is a brain that is not able to work with words, very much like our paper boy. And you can see the difference in how the neurons firing up in the brains look in these two brains. So every time you deny yourself the act of reading, you are actually dimming the red in your brain, and you're allowing those lights to go out. When we don't encourage reading, we are not firing up enough of lights so that our brains are fully alive. I want you to think about this, and I want you to raise questions as well about this. So we'll just go forward and I'll give you 4 more really lovely brain facts. This is fairly new and I'm quite excited by it. That, of course, we now know because of, just brain science and MRI work, that how the brain lights up when you do what is called deep reading. But what we're also coming to know is that even when I finish reading something, and therefore you consider the brain in a resting state, those particular centers that were activated when you were reading this absolutely passionate, exciting text continue to stay lit up. So the benefits of reading something good and powerful remain even when you have stopped reading. And this might explain why people who read actually always seem brighter or faster thinkers or more alive. I don't know. I'm just putting this out there. But this is an exciting thing to know, that even when I stop reading, if I did read something intellectually exciting, its benefits are going to remain. The next fact I want to leave you with, which also excites me, particularly for parents with young children, is our brain's ability to produce something called white matter. So white matter really, in lay terms, is what our brains produce in order to make these connections, these neural connections. The more connections my brain has, if you think of something like a Christmas tree or a house lit up for Diwali, the more lights it has, the more alive and fired up it is, and the more its potential to foster thinking, feeling, and everything that comes from that. Now, what science is telling us is that when children are learning to read, when they are actually learning new skills of reading, the brain is its most active production of white matter. And how lovely is that? So sometimes we feel that, oh, I know how to read and I'm not going to read anymore. And I don't push myself to read more difficult texts. I don't push myself to read longer books. I don't push myself to read over different types of medium, maybe graphic books, maybe reading manga, which is from the opposite side. I don't do that. I'm again denying my brain this capacity for white matter. Yeah, Amrita, you ask a very important question, and that's really a whole area that has allowed us to understand brain science. We've understood about the normal brain by actually studying not neurotypical brains. So Studies that have been done on people who are visually impaired have shown us how powerful that occipital center is. Now, the amazing thing is our brains have something called plasticity, which is they do their own adjustments. And the human mind is so powerful that actually it skips certain connections and makes other connections in order to show a visually impaired person, give them some signs, some sensorial clues that then allow them to decode and make sense of things. So it is the touch that is very, very heightened in a visually impaired person. You know, the center of touch, which is also very close to our language centers, and that becomes the sensory input. Whereas for neurotypical people, our eyes are our sensory, the visual is our sensory input. What a lovely question. Thank you. So besides gray matter production, which is again a really powerfully important fact, the next one I want to tell you about is, especially for all of you who are keeping physically fit, is that reading, there is no other act that actually, they say, neurobiologically challenges the muscles of the brain as reading a text, because of the number of processes from seeing, language centers, feeling, connecting, comprehension, every center that it wires up. It is your most powerful treadmill. And so you want a fit brain, then you should read, because several brain functions are involved in the act of reading. So when we don't do this often, but if you think of the brain as a muscle and that muscle needs exercise, then a really beautiful way to exercise it is actually to pick up a book and read. So that would be my third big fact to tell you for the day. That every time we are not reading, we're also denying our brain its muscle strengthening exercise, which we now know is powerful. Two other really simple facts which you know, which also came up in the chat. One is that because reading requires what we call sequential memory, in the sense that I have to read something, remember it, then read the next thing, then join that, remember that, then I need to hold on for what next is coming, and then bring it all together for comprehension. Because it's demanding that kind of input from me, my RAM, like if you think of your brain as having this storage device in it, actually improves the more you read. And so again, denying ourselves the act of reading is actually denying ourselves a very natural way at the moment of building our working memory. So many people offer some kind of memory, I don't know, build your memory classes, and some kind of artificial processes in order to improve memory and concentration. And here you have reading, which actually naturally builds your working memory and your concentration. Yes, Sandeep. So reading and writing are actually very closely intertwined. This is a problem from the 80s that we've inherited in our school system, where we've not kept in touch with enough of research, where we initially looked at reading and writing as what we call discrete skills, like they were separate. You did this and then you did this. But we now know from so much of research on language centers that actually reading and writing are very intertwined. And in fact, there was an amazing essay I read some years back that said, if you think of early man could have written before he spoke, because we did cave paintings, which were marks, and we did marks on grounds, which is all forms of writing, perhaps long before we evolved as a society with a common sound or a group of sounds that we all agreed was language. So writing is an extremely powerful act in the act of reading, and they go very closely together. So Sandeep, if you read and write, I am just so happy your brain is fully fired up, because it's going to demand all the same processes. of course it will help. Thank you for asking, Sandeep. And the next little fact I wanted to leave you with is, if we go to the next slide, please, is something that I think is of both interest as well as like a cautionary warning. I was reading an article that is claiming it, so it needs to be backed with more research, I feel. But it was claiming that the attention span of the human mind on an average has fallen to less than that of a goldfish. Now, when I was young, if somebody said you had the attention span of a goldfish, this was the ultimate insult, because goldfish, whose brains are so tiny, apparently are able to attend for nothing more than 8 seconds of time. But this particular article was positing that the speed at which we scroll and move and look at media now is couple of seconds, which if you aggregate this means that we are actually attending to data in our so-called reading time to that is less than that of a goldfish. And this is troubling, because attention is also something that we train our brains to have. So if any of you are finding that if now after say 2 years you pick up a book and you're actually struggling to finish the book, it's because your brain is struggling to attend to the act of reading. Because the kind of demand reading makes on our brains is of a particular kind. And if we are not practicing that enough, our brain, having this ability for plasticity, loses this. And so if you're finding concentration more difficult, you're finding sticking with the same long text, you're counting the pages, 6 more, all of this, it's because you're getting tired and weary mentally of attending to the same task, because your brain is getting trained to be distracted. Now think about what is distracting you. Think about when you get onto a feed, how many ideas get posted so that your brain is all over the place. And think of how therefore you're training your brain to not attend. And that is problematic for deep reading. So this particular sign which I found, which said books, your reward for having an attention span, I thought was particularly lovely, because it's reminding us that, hey, you can attend, you can concentrate, pick a book. And it's also saying if you can't, a book is a great tool to begin to do that. Thank you. Am I saying this right? Harsimran, for acknowledging my effort at giving you strong facts. That is my intention, because I believe very strongly that all parents want what's best for their children. And I believe very strongly that we have to make public these knowledge or this information we have about reading, so that when you know better, you will do better. So I so appreciate that message, and thank you. So I've come more or less to the end of what I wanted to share, but I want to go forward and ask you to do one thing. If we go to the next slide, please. I want you first as parents to start reading. I know by the end of this month, a bag of books will come to your home, because your child is fortunate enough to be part of the Takshila Education Society schools. So a bag of books is coming to each child. This is not only for your child, dear parents, it's also for you, because when you read with your child, and that's something I'm going to save for the next webinar, what happens when we read with our children and when we talk about books with our children? So I'm hoping that before we meet the next time, you would have all dipped into your bag of books and you would have read them. And that way you will be able to talk to your child and with your child when they read. If you want to read for yourself, you just want to read for pleasure, Please don't ever hesitate to ask me for recommendations. I love making suggestions of things to read. So this is really, if at the end of this evening we make a decision to do one thing, and that is to read, all our time and our purpose is well worth it. I found a really beautiful comic, if we go to the next slide, by this man called Grant Snyder. And it's called Stuck in a Book. And I'll read it because I didn't know how to get a bigger image. It says, I will spend the summer with my head in a book, dive deep into a story, perfect my reader's tan, listen to the rhythms of language, follow twisting plot lines, burn through page after delicious page, let the light fail, let the world pull against me. I will keep reading until I reach the end. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being with me on this journey. We'll go to the last slide, which is a small glimpse of one of our rooms in our library. If any of you are ever visiting Goa, please come and see us. But otherwise, I'm going to meet you on these webinars, and I'm so looking forward to you receiving this bag of books and really nurturing our children's reading, particularly in this time when I'm convinced that reading will save us. If you have any questions, any comments, anything you want to ask me, I'm all yours for the next half an hour. Thank you. Yes, Purva. It's only by example. Yeah, so Pradeep, in the bag of books your children will get, I have made a particular kind of selection, and I'm so thankful that the team at Takshila Education Society completely trusted me. And so there are books that will give our children perspective, that there are books, there are stories that will compel our children to think about things, and which is why you reading the books is important. And in the next webinar, we'll talk about how we can have conversations with our children so that we really pull out the fruits of these books. Because sometimes I'll read it only at the level at which I can get. But when I share it with you, when I talk to you and we talk together, something else happens. So I love your question. I can see that you're a deeply sensitive parent. Thank you. And I hope the bag of books meets your needs. And if you need anything else, I'm here to support you. Sanjay, this reading and what we know from research is that really it begins in the home. And which is why that film Paperboy for me is so evocative, because that's a child who has no home and he has no apprenticeship in reading. So one thing, it's hard, I know, but one thing is for you to start reading with your child, for you to make reading something that you'll do together. And just like you would say, go out and play, or watch only so much TV, or please finish your vegetables, or have that glass of milk, we have to make reading something that we do. There's just no shortcut. Yes, parent who is feeling that the children have become agitated. One terrible effect is screen time, and I'm sorry for what this is doing to our children. Yes, we know that this exposure to screen time is affecting a number of us in many ways. So if as much as you can limit that, it would be one way. But the other would be to do things with you rather than ask children to do things on their own. I think every child loves being with a parent. So what could you do? What do you all both enjoy doing or all enjoy doing? together. I know, and with if you're in Pune and right now the lockdown's even more severe, something in the house, I don't know, make different shape rotis together, paint, do crafts. It doesn't have to always be a book, but when you're doing that, you will start talking to each other and learning each other well, and then you'll bring that relationship to your book reading. But I think physically sitting down and doing things together as a family is incomparable. Working with our hands, because our hearts open up then. For a 9-year-old, you wait, Darshita, for the bag, and then you tell me what you think about the little selection you'll get. It's really a mixed bag. I hope that pleases your 9-year-old. Yeah, Girish, I will suggest something that you can read. I will send a list to Shraddha and ask her to post it on a parent group. That's a really good point. Thank you, Girish. I'll make a parent reading list. It's a great point. Vian likes funny books. Yeah. Yeah. Can I recommend some comedy books? This is hard for me. I'm not known to be somebody who reads a lot of humor. I read a lot of serious stuff. I'll just think, and if something comes to me, I will post it now. Yeah. Deeps 503. Sorry, I'm using whatever names I'm seeing. I think as early as possible, we start by reading to children. So a nursery child has to be taken in our godis, and we have to take a book in our hand and we have to look at it, even if it is 2 minutes the first time, 3 minutes. But you must be present. You must be physically present. This has been proven across different kinds of studies, that the role of the adult, particularly the loving adult, which is why the onus is on parents and dadimas and dadajis and loving caregivers, has been, really solid. And it's in those laps where children learn the love of reading, actually. So reading to the child and with the child. There's just, again, no shortcuts. Yeah, this is the age appropriateness now is a slightly tricky question. There is this really sweet cartoon that sometimes I use in library workshops. It has two librarians, and one librarian is telling the other librarian, I did not appreciate the books you gave that child. And he looks at her and he says, so are you now censoring books? Did you think I gave the wrong type of books? And she says, no, it's not about censoring. I'm thinking of their level. So what level that child is reading at, you have given the wrong book. And in the last panel, he looks at her and he says, even I'm thinking of the level. And for me, the level is limitless. And this gives you two perspectives on reading. Do we only give a child a book where we say, this is where you are and therefore you should read this book? Or do we say, this is where you are and this is the book? Because we know from reading research that motivation is a huge thing that fires the brain to work harder. And so if I really want to read this complicated book on cars, I might push my reading to actually read that book on cars. So what I do in the library is I actually ask the child to look at the book. Sometimes I get a sense that they are not ready for that book. But then I say, you try it. You read a couple of paragraphs and see whether it's easy for you to read. And if you want it, you can have it. If you think you're not ready, the book will always be in the library for you. So for me as a practitioner, these conversations are critical. There's no shortcut again. I'd like to know the child, I'd like to have a conversation with the child, and I'd like to know what the child wants to read. Having said that, there are some books developmentally I would worry if a child is reading when they're too young, because I do think there are certain themes, certain ways of approaching themes that if I can introduce at the right time, I would. So it's an excellent question, but not a question that can be easily answered with a yes or no. It has multiple layers, but a really good question. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Surya. I think you demonstrate incredibly good parenting as a reader. That it's when I'll read with my child, I'm also there for that scaffold on comprehension. I'm there to explain what happened. I don't know if any of you have children like this, but I know many children. I myself am a reader like that. That if I'm reading something quite complex, I actually love to find somebody else who read that so I can talk about those complex bits. Because in talking, my own brain opens up. So to be a parent of that kind, like Surya, who's sitting with the child, reading with the child, oh, there can be nothing more beautiful than that. And even as a parent, you get to know what your child is reading and your world opens up. Uh, I'm just suddenly thinking I should add that as a hugely positive thing. Relationships with our children because we read with them. Unparalleled. Very different from a relationship as a parent when you go to the movie theater to watch a film or all of you sit down to watch TV. I think that's different from reading with a child. Non-reader, Sunny can. Age, if you could post an age for me, that'll help. Like a non-reader at what age? Again, in the bags for younger children, and parents, please don't be surprised and horrified. I have consciously selected, and poor Shraddha's gone out of her way to procure what we call wordless books. These are books with no text. And I've consciously put this in because reading pictures is actually a very high order skill again. Somehow we've got pushed into a particular paradigm where we think to be a reader means you have to read only words. And yet Instagram and all these visual medias are showing us how reading pictures is also a kind of reading. So powerful tool for non-readers is beginning with wordless books, because all of us, and this is something we have as an ability, we are able to read images. And that becomes a very, very good stepping stone, is that start with pictures. So the nursery and prep class bags have some wordless picture books, which are really to trigger conversations, to demystify this idea of reading, and to enjoy together, because they're books you can return to again and again. Sarabjit, first you enjoy your read bag when it comes to you. But beyond that, if you ever need any kind of reading help, then please reach out to me. Give me the age of your child. We can also get on a quick call, and I'm really happy to make suggestions. This is the one thing that brings me joy. Yeah. Yeah, Vibhusha, P. Vibhusha, this is something even last year I was quite deeply troubled about. What is going to be the effect of social interaction for our children, no? Because school performs many functions. One is the scholastic function, which I think schools have, really jumped over hurdles and have found a way to make sure scholastic material reaches our children. But schools are also beautiful ecosystems where we learn to get along with different people, where we learn to interact, we learn to wait for our turns, we learn to respect that I'm one amongst many and that everything in its good time. Where I just learn to go with the flow, I emotionally mature because my parent or my grandparent is not there at every moment to, dust me off when I fall or cuddle me, and I grow emotionally. And this lockdown's taken this away from our children's lives, no? and stripped us of this ability to interact as human beings? I actually don't have an answer, and I'm really sorry. I don't know myself. But if you live anywhere where you can, form what I'm now hearing is a new word called bubble. So you can actually form a bubble, and maybe only these children interact. If you have a group of friends and you're like comfortable with each other, some days, and I'm being bold in saying this, I feel we need to weigh some risks. I don't know if it is healthy for anybody to be locked down in the way that we've kind of had to be. And yet the risks are so great in this country. So I'm also very confused. At this point, I can only say I empathize. I'm sorry. And I won't make any kind of suggestions that I myself don't know if they're healthy for our children. But I understand what you're saying, and it's a big one, the social interaction. Thank you for raising it. How lovely that you remember a last year's webinar, whichever parent remembered Beyond Boundaries. I think I'm so honored, so blessed to even have someone in the audience who can remember something like that. That is one of my favorite topics, this idea of a reading diet. More than an appetite, I think my phrase is a reading diet. So as you would have figured, even from today's talk, I look at the act of reading really as functions of being a human being. And so for me, reading, just like we think of our day-to-day diet, like you think I need to have at least 2 or 3 servings of fruit, I need to have some raws, some greens, I need to have some protein. And I think as parents we do this so responsibly for our children. I've never met a parent, never, across social class, who is comfortable with their child only eating kurkure or chips or lollies. I've never met a parent, and I've met a lot of parents. So I can say this with confidence that we have an amazing radar on diet and on balance. And for me, I want that we pull that same radar into our children's reading diet, which is, what is my child reading? How much of what is my child reading? And now I'm extending reading to even viewing, even things that my child is playing online. Because even games that our children play have themes, and the themes can be looked at as the nutrient. So, what is the nutrients of my child's diet for the brain? And how can I even begin to diversify it? So there are superfoods, there are also super reads. But sometimes you can't go from junk to super. So what could you do? How can we slowly start shaping this? Because here I have an argument that I'm hoping somebody argues further with me as the years progress, is that when you've tasted good stuff to read, it's very hard to go back to junk. And I want this for our children. I want that my children actually taste good stories. They know what is a good, well-written story. They know what is a book that is produced by a thoughtful researcher who's put content down. When you know that, then you actually stay away from the slightly weakish stuff. But that'll only happen if I've tasted enough. So I hope that answers the reading appetite diet question. Again, not easy to practice. And I think in this time when our children are also frustrated like us, also how much of things do we want to push? So also in this time, I'll ask you to be more gentle than if it wasn't a lockdown. I don't know what's giving our children joy. And so I'm actually saying if they are right now happy doing something, I want them to be happy because I don't know what's happening to them. Yeah. Abdul, I'm with you on the fairy tales. I don't know who says they are good. So I'll tell you fairy tales as a genre, right? If you think of the what we'll call the literariness of the fairy tale, the fact that it often has something dark in it, like something terrible happens to the character. They often go on a journey by themselves, and typically the symbol has been forests. They grow stronger, they encounter evil, they make some decisions. So in literature, we look at the pattern of fairy tales as an actually as a way for children to grow emotionally stronger. Because if you identify with the protagonist in a fairy tale and you are now encountering this lonely journey, you're meeting the evil one, you're doing something, and then you're coming out successful in the end, it is believed by literary theorists that this actually strengthens our emotional selves. Before I face the real demons in the real world, stories actually give me that inner strength. Now, what's happened is the market has appropriated, this is my personal view, the market has appropriated fairy tales and has turned them into these productized kind of versions. And those have very different problems. Besides being leads for merchandising and colors and all of that, often there is this prince who has to rescue someone. So, Abdul, what version of a fairy tale? If you actually find some of the the original versions of fairy tales, they are beautiful pieces of writing and they have dilemmas within them. It's these stripped down Disneyfied ones in these glossy books that are problematic. So I agree with you on that. Oh dear Pooja, your child wants to watch only cartoons. I'm hearing you when you say, please help, ma'am. How about switching the TV off and both of you read a book together? Have you tried? This is my, people who've heard me before will say, though she has only one answer for everything. I'm so sorry. It is my one answer. I think discipline. I know this seems like an old-fashioned word, but there is also a truth developmentally that our children, just like adults, we all need boundaries because that helps us to know where to push, how far to go. And children particularly actually respect boundaries. So have you tried putting boundaries on the TV watching? How much of time? Now, from watching many hours, please don't make this mistake of suddenly cutting it off. There will be huge tantrums and troubles, and it will be sad. But how about deciding about some boundaries? And I don't know how old your child is, but if possible, to have a conversation even why you're worried. Children respond beautifully when you tell them why you're worried. They may not agree, but I think they start thinking. These are just two quick things I can tell you. Yeah, Rishabh, this is exactly what I was saying about the kind of attention. Yeah, so please remember cartoons are visual, there's movement, there's sound. So it's like, being given a lot of aid to think, lot of mental aid to think, because you don't have to do it. It's all done. It's like those microwave meals. No, it's only the 10 seconds that are left. Everything is done, packaged, and given to you. That's why they are recreational, because you don't really have to think. You can just sort of lean back and enjoy the cartoon. But too much of that, and I hope after today you'll get a sense of what it does. It trains the mind to only want that. And so again, curtailing, disciplining will help. Ashish Shah, I hope the read bag is going to be an exciting start for you, because there are books for 4, 5 and 6-year-old. Rishabh Kumar, one thing is to read with him, even if you'll decide that every day you'll read 2 pages and you be there and he reads one para, you read one para. This has worked with many children for me in my library work. Is because reading tires their brains in the beginning. It's very important that you are the reader for them and they are the listener. So you may start also by being fully the reader and the child is listening, and then you have a conversation on what you read so that we're comprehending something together. But then by the next week, and you have to be disciplined. Oh, sorry, I'm bringing this word up again and again because reading requires that. Then it's the child would reads a bit, you read more and the child reads a bit. And you will, and this is the most joyful thing. At some point, they're tired of you because now they've kind of got it and they're in the story. And the child takes the book on their own and moves forward. I wish you that joy. It is beautiful when it happens. I agree, Ravish, with you that there is a very, very rich corpus of books in perhaps Hindi. I know Bangla, I know Marathi, I know in Kannada. So there is a very rich corpus of children's literature, and sometimes not everything can be done through the school. While I agree with you, I think this is something you need to take up with your school. I think each bag definitely has Hindi books and some beautiful books in Hindi. But if that's not enough and you want more, I think you must address it. But you must also remember that as a parent, you have a responsibility to have a home library. And not everything can happen from the school. You also have a responsibility to join a public library in whichever city you live in and make demands over there. This is what creates a reading culture. I have my own books. I have books from school. I belong to the public library or the panchayat library, and if there's a circulating library, I'm also part of that. That's what readers do. So thank you for that comment. It's a very powerful comment. In this country, we cannot completely ignore our own languages and our literature. In fact, that's how we come to know about ourselves. But whereas how much of that can go in the little read bag of 10 or 12 books, I really don't know. But it's a good point. Thank you. Either more than appropriate fairy tale for a 5-year-old, I would think about an appropriate version of a fairy tale. And I don't know why a fairy tale for a 5-year-old. I think just let the 5-year-old enjoy all kinds of stories. Don't limit them at this point. Purva, being a parent is so much about compromise now. So first what they like. Sorry, I'm like completely pro-child. So first what the child likes. Once I'm in the relationship with the child, I will talk and I will look at how I can negotiate and say, now last whole week we read your preference. Can we read one of mine? But begin with the child, Purva. I think you'll also see the purpose in that. I've actually not experienced. I have 2 sons who are adult men, and so I don't know what it must be to be in the home while your child is doing online classes. So firstly, my God, you need a really big hug for just, getting through this year, because you've suddenly become parent, teacher, emotional supporter, healthcare worker, warrior, everything to the 100th degree, right? It's all on you. What a year you must have had, but it will pass. I'm willing it, confident it will pass. How can you encourage your child or support your child when they are online? No, One thing I hope even in our online classes we begin to manage better is how much of time on screen and how much of time off screen. If even we can ideate together and provide schools and teachers with ideas, I think that might be lovely. Uh, but you know, one thing I think you must do, P. Vibhusha, is to find some time for yourself. I don't know how, but I really think that would be your strength every day. Is if it means getting up a bit earlier or putting your child to bed earlier so that you have some quiet time, but you also have to take care of yourself, because I think you're critical in this present state, and we can't have anything happen to our parents who are at home minding, caring and loving the whole family to goodness. So perhaps that would be my strongest suggestion, is do something for you, even if it means chai alone in the veranda and nobody can disturb you. I don't know. Think about it. Don't forget yourself. So thank you, everybody. It's been, as always, for me, beautiful to meet parents and talk with you. Thank you for the trust. Thank you for the listening. I so look forward to our next webinar. And please do give me your honest feedback when the bags come to you. And Shraddha and Dhandapani sir and Simrat for such beautiful support. Thank you. And to everyone at Takshila Education Society, thank you.